Greetings, everybody. Thank you for being here today. My name is Elizabeth Beek. I coordinate adult education programs here at Trees Atlanta. We're so glad you're here. I'm here with my colleagues, Reagan and Rebecca. We'll be doing our best to make sure that today's presentation goes as smoothly as possible for all. And today's presentation is going to be led by Jud y Yi, who is our Director of Marketing and Outreach, and Greg Levine, Executive Director of Trees Atlanta. Thank you so much.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. What we have is about 40 minutes of probably about 40 hours of presentation that we're going to try to squeeze into 40 minutes of our webinar. So forgive me for flying through some topics very fast. One of the things that you will notice as we go through these slides is that we've provided several hyperlinks where you can continue your journey into looking at the detail, details on your own, and of course we'll be available to answer any questions as much as we're able to. So as we move forward, know that we will provide these slides to you as a follow-up to this webinar, and we will be posting the recording on our YouTube channel, so you will have access to them. However, one of the things I would like to tell you right away is that we are using this webinar not as just an informational to just kind of tell you what we've read, but it is a trigger or a call to action, because we need everyone in this audience to make note of the points that resonate with you and the priorities that you want to see make it into the tree protection ordinance. There is a small window of time between now and we believe March, really, because all the signals that we're reading is that the city, including the city council and the mayor, are working toward an April deadline to have a final tree protection ordinance passed, which means that we need to be able to send in our comments in time for them to create another draft and replace it. And it's called a substitute ordinance. Needs to be submitted to city council committees and the full committee before it gets to the mayor. So what we need you to do is think about what you're going to do this week in order to let your comments and your priorities known with the people who need to hear it. So please comment on the tree protection ordinance, hopefully before or by your next NPU meeting. That is a good deadline to remember. Submit your comments to the Arborist Division, to Commissioner Prince, who is the Commissioner of City Planning Department, and the City Council. I will provide you emails and phone numbers at the end of this presentation. And of course, we'll follow up with this deck so you can get those information later. We have provided some sample language here. You can take a look at that later, but basically, if you agree with our recommendations, say so. If you have other priorities, please do comment on that. But the deadline is coming so close. Make it your intention during this webinar to take the notes on the things that you will send your comments in on. And one brief thing that we will cover is a question of an administrative zoning amendment that you might be aware of. I'll go over it with you in the next slide. The deadline is even shorter for that, so we'll talk about that briefly. And lastly, as an overarching comment, the City Department of Planning is also conducting a parallel zoning update. It's called Atlanta Zoning 2.0. There's several changes in the zoning that will impact trees. So please make sure that you take some time to participate in any community efforts that are going on in your neighborhood. So let's get into it. So the administrative zoning variance that is provided to NPUs right now for vote, our recommendation on this, simply put, is vote no. It is a companion zoning change that goes along with the tree protection ordinance. The fact that we do not have an updated tree protection ordinance is the reason that we advise no. They need to be adopted at the same time. So when it's adopted, we also encourage you to note that the current ordinance specifically says that in order to save a tree, any tree 6 inches in DBH or greater, The structure can be moved 50% into the setback. It does not clarify which setback, so that means it can go forward 50% into the front yard setback, backyard setback, and the side setbacks. And then we haven't seen any language to indicate if there's any penalties if that saved tree is damaged or destroyed. And what an administrative zoning variance means is that instead of having any community review, it just requires the city arborist to approve it, and then it's done. So again, we advise that NPUs vote no and hold this companion zoning changes until they specify that only a priority tree can trigger this administrative zoning variance, and we'll define priority trees in a moment. And that the parcel must meet all other tree protection requirements, and that if that tree is damaged or is destroyed, there's fines and fees associated with that damaged tree. So I'm sure your NPU has been talking about it, but that is our brief recommendation on that administrative zoning variance. So let's talk about why we're even doing this. Atlanta's tree canopy is our key asset for long-term resilience, health, and well-being. We are doing this not because trees are an aesthetic decision or even simply a landscaping decision. Trees are critical to all measures of infrastructure, health, and well-being of a community. However, we're losing trees at an alarming rate. When we take a look at the available data on tree removal for the city of Atlanta, the number of trees removed in the city of Atlanta has doubled in the last 4 years. I would have to put a shout out there for another tree advocates that has been working with us. The Tree Next Door, their website provides an extensive amount of data that they're culling from the tree permit information. So we're always relying upon them to really help us understand what the pattern of tree permitting and tree loss is. So take a look at that to know what's been happening in our city. So trees are always going to be aging. Some are going to die of pests and diseases. Some are overtaken by invasive plant species. We as an organization at Trees Atlanta obviously address many of these issues with natural decline of trees, and we do our best to improve the overall health of a community and our trees. But what we're seeing is, and what the tree protection ordinance is really intended to do, is really address the removal due to development. So in that process, we have to think to ourselves, while we're thinking about the tree protection ordinance, what happens if we fail to balance tree protection while supporting growth? We've heard about the dramatic increase of the population forecasted not only for Metro Atlanta, but also the city of Atlanta. The city of Atlanta has added 10,000 residents for each of the past 2 years. We're leading city in the number of approved building permits. So we know that this pressure will continue. So what we need is a tree protection ordinance that can work for us, that will protect this natural resource, as well as allowing us to grow as a city. This photos ahead of you, the one on the right, you can see that a lot of people will say, well, I have trees near me. But you can see where the flooding has occurred, where this subdivision is. This is in Cobb County. It's partially due to however they have managed the land underneath. Tree ordinances, the purpose of it is to make sure that we're able to protect the natural green infrastructure while allowing development to move forward. It's not, it's not just something that is aesthetic. We know that so much climate change issues have been impacting us, from the fires in the West Coast and the floods and the storms. That can seem overwhelming, and that might seem outside the capacity of a city to do something about. But the one thing that we can control, which is very localized dynamic and a bit of a subset of the same kind of weather-related dynamics of climate change, is urban heat island effect. There is a correlation where there's more impervious surfaces and fewer trees and less green space creates basically a pizza stone in a city that radiate heat. Why does this matter? It's highly correlated with other effects, such as higher chronic health issues, and more deaths. In fact, people think about hurricanes or tornadoes being the thing to be afraid of when it comes to weather-related issues. But in fact, statistics are showing that extreme heat is a top weather-related cause of fatality in the nation. So in a community like Atlanta, where heat is already a natural part of our climate, we need to control what we can within the cities that we live and be mindful of our ability to control urban heat island effect. Again, using that theme, this is charts from the ARC, that where we see urban heat island hotspots in the image on the left is exactly where we have the lowest tree canopy in the city. This, no surprise, also correlates with where the worst air pollution and other vulnerabilities are highest in our city. What we are trying to do is ensure that the benefits of trees are accessible to all areas of the city, and that there is some regulation to balance that incredible pressure for development. Left unchecked, left without a counterbalance to protect this natural resource, I think these hotspots will spread to more areas and intensify. Meanwhile, we've been talking about this tree protection ordinance since 2017. We have been working on this for 7 years, you guys. And in that time, here's some statistics. When we first started tracking the tree canopy in the city of Atlanta, that canopy cover was 47.9%. At the next assessment, we had lost more trees and we were at 47.1%. In the next assessment in 2018, we were at 46.5%. What this means is, essentially, you might think that that's just a few percentage points. What's the big deal? That amount of loss in canopy is equivalent to 2 square miles of land densely packed with trees. To put it another way, it's like clear cutting Cascade Springs Nature Preserve every year, 10 straight years. That park would be clear cut every single year for 10 years to meet the kind of loss that we have been able to measure. So what will happen? The city is currently working on releasing the last assessment, which was done in 2023. We're still eagerly awaiting for it. But based upon what's going on with this, with these statistics, we're saying that, you know, that loss, that tree loss in 2023 is probably going to bring us at 45% or less. So we have a highly urgent need for the tree protection ordinance to be passed quickly and to be the kind of ordinance that can actually protect our existing canopy and ensure that we can reverse the loss at some scale. So what have we been doing for 7 years? So one of the things that we have been able to accomplish, and it was accomplished in December of 2022, is what people are calling phase 1 updates. There has been dozens of people who have put in thousands and thousands of hours of their own volunteer time to make sure that the ordinance is moving forward. And we thank all of those citizen advocates, interested parties, and industry professionals who have lent their expertise to this process. All of this, although we're speaking on behalf of Trees Atlanta, this process just simply could not have been made possible without a lot of smart people who care about our city inputting and volunteering their time to do this. So this is a document issued by the city. I will not go into the detail of it because of our lack of time, but please take note at this link that I've provided at the bottom of the page, and you will be able to view this document or download it. The 2-second overview of what's included, what was passed in this low-hanging fruit, which is another way of saying, hey, we all got together and these are no-brainers. We all agree generally that these are the things that we all want to see in the new tree protection ordinance. So this is already in the tree protection ordinance. There's no, there's no kind of draft portion of it. So it includes improved planting specification. We advocated for a larger soil area, soil volume, how far you can space the trees. It includes information about which species are preferable. It talks about it, now enforces chain link fencing to be used to protect trees in front yard during construction. There's changes to parking lot requirements. And one thing in particular that we really like is that when a tree is replanted as a requirement of the tree protection ordinance or as recompense, you must ensure the survivability of that tree for life. So when you see that tree in a parking lot and it's dead, they are not in non-compliant with the TPO. They have to replace that tree. There is a requirement to remove invasive species off of trees in order to be counted for various portions of the TPO. If a city purchases land for public projects, that is a forested land, city arborist needs to review that site just to make sure that there aren't any better alternatives that would not cause the destruction of a forested space. And one other thing that we heard from the community that they wanted was some way to help low-income households handle DDH trees, and there is a $200,000 allocation to help with that. Again, there's more details. Please link through to the hyperlinks that I've provided for more information. So with the time we have left, let's dig into phase 2. So after December 2022, the working group, which was a large group, met extensively throughout a span of 6 months to talk about the which concepts and how should we go forward and what would be our priority. To us, our priorities were about recompense, tree preservation and tree density on all the various zoning properties. What do we do about affordable housing and helping make sure that that initiative can move forward? And of course, the tree trust fund, which is the money that we collect when we collect for recompense fees and fines. So once we finished commenting on the concepts that each interest areas wanted, the city went away and then they worked on it for over a year. And it wasn't until December, right before the Christmas holidays, that someone happened to forward to us a very early draft documents that were incomplete. We started, Trees Atlanta and some tree advocates started reviewing it to think, is this going in the right direction? So what we did was take that early document and said, we identified—
Judy, as far as the tree advocates, it was the working committee advocates. It was 6 of us that responded to the draft.
Thank you, Greg. And I should give them credit that they're, representatives from the Tree Next Door, from City in the Forest, and some tree professionals who joined us. And really, we rolled up our sleeves and dug in and said, if within this very early draft, what do we agree that this is going in the right direction? And overall, the concepts were addressed. But once we received the final document, January 30th, which is the first time we received it from someone from an NPU sent it over to us asking us about it. It's the first time that we've seen a full text of the ordinance. So this is a pretty rapid evaluation. We might not be 100% right, but based upon our review of this and talking to some experts, this is where we've landed. We asked for 5 changes to that earlier draft, and some of them made it in the January 30th draft and some did not. In order to digest these very complex kind of ideas easily for this webinar, what we've done is give it a grade, and then we'll describe what the changes are and why we gave each the grade. This document that you see shown on the left is actually a City of Atlanta document. What I'll do is compare how they've summarized the changes and what we see within the text of the ordinance. So if you want to see this fact sheet in totality, click on the link at the bottom and you'll be able to get there. The first one is recompense. We asked that the recompense be set to $260 per inch. Overall, we give this update a grade of A-, and here's why. Number one request was that we wanted the city to match the cost of taking down a tree to be the true cost of replacing the tree. If you recall, the purpose of the recompense fund is to make the city whole. When a property owner is unable to replant the same number of inches that they've removed on their property, they have to pay recompense. So that we take that money, the city or organizations like us, take that funding to fund the planting of a tree somewhere else where it can grow to make the city whole. What we've been doing for the last 20-something years is under collected for the true cost of planting trees. So other funds had to have offset to make the community whole. So the recompense will be raising to market rate of $260 per inch, but not all at once, over 4 years time. And I'll share with you what that schedule is. The replanted trees in inches, to give an incentive to not just pay the recompense, but to plant trees. If that landowner chooses to plant trees, they can retire the inches recompense at 1.25 the rate of just paying by catch. So the ordinance again is pushing toward trees, not just money. And of course, there's other provisions that also prioritize saving existing trees, which is our #1 strategy. So the full recompense really only applies for something called priority trees. There are highest value trees. All other healthy trees that are not invasive are considered non-priority trees, and they get discounted to 50% recompense rate. There's other waivers or discounts for public projects like affordable housing. We'll talk about that more extensively later. In the current current ordinance, they can be reduced 50 to 100% of recompense, which we have some comments on, but that's the way it's written currently. The next is there are further reductions if you save or preserve priority trees on your property, or you create permanent conservation areas in commercial zones. Again, nodding to the priority or importance of saving existing trees. And the ordinance sets the review schedule that the fee will be reviewed every 5 years. All of those are very positive progresses. We like to see a couple of other changes. By the time the recompense gets fully implemented in 2029, those cost assessments are already 10 years old. We think that might be outdated, and we'd like to see a provision for a yearly automatic adjustment for inflation, or that the period that the fee is reviewed be decreased to every 3 years. I'm saying a lot of stuff. I have my colleague Greg Levine, our executive director, with us. And Greg, please do jump in if I overlook something, or if not, I'll just keep on ramming forward.
Go forward.
Okay, will do. So here is a snippet from the summary that the city provided. You see up here there is a recompense, the rate in the first year in 2026. The cost per inch is $117, and it gradually increases until 2029 when it becomes $260 per inch. And here's the remarkable difference. Because the recompense rate was not changed since the TPO was written in 2001, that recompense is really set at $30 per inch. And we know that it is not possible for us to really replace the lost inches with that kind of recompense funding available. Okay. Some people think that recompense is too high, but one of the things that we have to remember is that when we remove a tree, we're removing all the benefits that tree is providing. We regard trees as natural green infrastructure. For every tree removed, for all the green space covered with impervious surface, there's impacts that are literally, in this case, flow down to someone else. So as our city grows, we need to make sure that we're not overlooking the value of a natural green infrastructure and then increasing the cost of gray infrastructure burdens. Here is a water main break, which unfortunately is becoming more frequent, but as we grow our aging water systems, become even more burden when we have fewer trees to help absorb and divert that stormwater. So there's always unintended consequences if we do not properly preserve and offset the resources that we do have. Here's another image in 2009 where creeks and rivers overcome their banks because, you know, we see the trees here, so why is it flooded? Because the runoff from other areas within the city are overwhelming our other natural infrastructures. Lastly, one of the most important or most successful strategies that we've been able to implement with the tree protection ordinance that exists is our ability to buy forested land with recompense. We might not be able to plant as many as purchasing and putting into conservation of forested space. Lake Charlotte, for example, we estimate about 65,000 trees were preserved in the 215 acres that is in this nature preserve. So recompense does represent important funding to find alternative solutions when preservation or replanting in locally on that street is not possible. So the next item that we said was a top issue was the issue of how are we going to preserve trees? Is there a standard to keep trees on property? And how many trees need to be on property? These concepts are called tree preservation standard and the tree density requirement. We first have mainly been focusing on the single family residential lots because single family residential lots represent about 80% of the canopy or about high 70% of the total land use in the city of Atlanta. Of course, the other properties matter. Public spaces matter and commercial spaces matter. But in this regard, we give the changes to this standard a B. So what the preservation standard says is that certain trees are considered priority trees and that a certain percent of these high priority trees must be saved on the property and they can be located wherever it is that tree grows. So that is the concept of preserving high priority trees. And I will show you a table of what those trees are. Priority trees are the highest ecological value by species and size. And they've been grouped into five categories, mostly depending upon species and size, whether they're slow going or fast growing. Of course, the other tree categories still remain. There's not healthy non-priority trees, which might not be the highest ecological species, but they're still important and they're still healthy trees within our landscape. These are different from undesirable or invasive tree species, which and that list has also been updated and modified. And lastly, DDH trees, which are dead, dying, and hazardous trees, which are treated significantly different by the tree protection ordinance. So protecting priority trees is what is valued by the current tree protection ordinance. It protects priority trees that might sit anywhere on the property and not just merely in the setback or in the boundaries. So there's going to be a little adjustment around those concepts. And then priority trees are counted by inches, whereas tree density is the end state. After construction is completed, before the certificate of occupancy is issued, there must be a certain number of trees that stand on that property. And we will go over those numbers. Why is it a B instead of an A? Well, part of it's related. It's not on the single family residential, but there's areas that we would like to be more protective of trees on commercial properties. In the January draft of the TPO, there's no preservation standards on commercial properties. This is especially problematic in multi-unit residential developments. We know there's industrial commercial properties, but when you have apartments and such, they're also considered commercial properties. And we believe that wherever people live, there should be trees, and we should be preserving our best trees on those properties. And for that reason, is the B. If we can improve some of those standards, it could become an A. Remember, we still have an opportunity to make changes. These grades are not fixed. we're kind of like in midterms, we're doing a check. And if we can make these changes happen by finals, which is this March deadline we're working toward, these grades can improve, and the benefits of these changes will serve the city of Atlanta. Again, this is how it's presented in the city summary, addressing the that before essentially the only trees that were protected were in setbacks, but now the focus is now the spotlight is on priority trees. There's if those priority trees cannot be saved, there is an alternative solution, which is called the limited land disturbance. And essentially what that means is if you cannot say the amount of inches of priority trees that's required, you must limit the amount of the land that you can disturb. And that is called, what that means is you can't move the soil, there's no grading, you can't use, put heavy stuff on top of that soil. It has to be fenced off as a tree safe area during protection. We think this is a good move because land that's left undisturbed, it's good for the trees that stand nearby, and it also protects the soil for new trees to be planted. I know it's a little confusing, but it does start to make sense after you look at it for a while. So here in this very important table called TPO2 are all those ideas condensed. So you will see, for example, in this equivalent of an R4 single family lot, that's medium lot, that particular lot has a priority tree preservation standard of saving 60% of the inches on that lot. If they cannot meet that requirement, because let's say all the priority trees are located in the center of the property and they need to remove it, they pay recompense for those trees removed, but they are now limited to 50% of their property can experience land disturbance. So only one or the other. After that construction is finished, they have to meet a tree density requirement. That's the equivalent of 21 trees per acre. So in this typical R4 lot, which is a quarter acre, let's say, they would need to meet that 21 trees per acre by 25%, or in other words, 6 trees to meet the requirement of the TPO. And again, you can find these tables and all the details within the January draft. We did not find this January draft posted to the city website, so we've made the draft available on our Google Share. So it is open for people to click into, and when you click into this section, it will go straight to the section that we're addressing. Next, here's a sample or a visual of what the priority tree list looks like. As you can see in group 1, trees are listed by their genus and species over here, and anything in group 1, they're priority at 18 inches DBH or larger. So if, for example, this eastern cottonwood was 12 inches big, it would not be in group 1. It would fall, it would not become a priority tree. It will be a non-priority tree. So please take a look at the full list at the link provided below.
And Judy, just as a reminder, the non-priority trees only have to do 50% recompense.
That's right. That's
a priority tree is 100% recompense.
That's right. And as we noted before, recompense owed in inches or in payment is only 50% for those for non-priority trees. So we're going to move on. I'm racing against the clock, and we have a few more slides to go through. So let me briefly cover what we do know about commercial and multifamily development. We mentioned that there's no tree preservation standards for these zoned properties except for certain greenfields. But the big change for this January TPO is that the cap on recompense has been removed. A lot of people really start to notice these commercial development because the property is clear cut, and not a lot of people know that there was actually a cap on recompense. They might be paying as little as $10,000 on recompense for an acre of trees removed due to the provision of the earlier TPO, that cap has been removed. The other protective measure that has been introduced that we like a lot is that when a commercial property is essentially a greenfield, meaning that it has 80% canopy cover and is larger than 5 acres, it's considered a greenfield development. If you develop in a greenfield development, you are required to preserve a minimum of 30% of that parcel to be protected as a preservation area, which we really think that that's a positive move. Commercial properties are also, though they don't have to preserve trees, they still do need to meet a tree density requirement similar to single family residential at about 20 trees per acre, and their calculations are done slightly different based upon land use. When they say priority trees on this land, priority trees or permanently protect other areas on their land, they commercial properties can receive multiplied recompense credit. So there's more incentives to save trees. There's improved planting specifications for commercial and all development. So we think that that's going to also make the planted trees healthier. I'm sorry, I'm hearing on my own. Greg, can you mute for a little bit? I'm here. Thank you. And then there's parking lot requirements, as we noted before, that all apply to a commercial development that overall we hope that will result in improvements for canopy related to commercial and multifamily development. We do, again, believe that more incentives and more requirements to have nature and trees near where people live especially would even make the TPO even better. And here's just a reiteration of what I just said. I'll move forward though. So next, let's judge the top issue regarding the tree trust fund. Evaluating the changes that were made to the tree trust fund, our grade for the January draft changes is an F. We think that there are some easy changes that can increase that grade to C or B or whatever it is, but currently this is why we think that the changes are not beneficial to the city. Again, the tree trust fund should represent the cost of trees that are not replaced on site so that it can be restored somewhere else. However, the January draft significantly increases the number of staffing funded by the tree trust fund. In fact, it's going to be increased from about 7 partial salaries to about 20 full salaries with benefits. We know that some of those salaries need to be adjusted for inflation, just like recompense needed to be done. But we think that this might be a little too aggressive, too early. But based upon back of the envelope calculations that we did, this could represent about $1 million to 1.5 million annually on staffing expenses alone. Our concern is that if you deplete the tree trust fund, we do not have the money it takes to buy forested land, which again has been one of our most powerful strategies for protecting canopy in the city of Atlanta. So what's missing? We would like to match the ramp up approach of the recompense fees to be a ramp up on allowable salaries to be matched with actual revenue collected. We like to see a cap on administrative expenses as a ratio of about 20% of annual revenue in trailing 3-year averages. Is kind of like in par with what a lot of nonprofits do. We limit our administrative expenses and so that most of our funding can be allocated toward program trees, planting, etc. We like to see a return of a 3-year limit for forest restoration for purchased properties. It used to be there, but this version removes that time limit. And lastly, this is big, so there's another slide on this, that public trees, when we remove public trees, they should also be paying into recompense rather than taking something they're calling offset credits in the draft. So we'll move into that. So that offset, what is offset credit? First, I need to quickly explain how public trees are treated by the current TPO. when the city removes street trees, park trees, the city has been required to replace inch per inch. So if it's a 10-inch tree was removed, you would have to replant 4 2.5-inch trees. So every inch removed was planted directly in the ground. Over time, this has become a very unworkable burden for the city. So the working group for the TPO rewrite all overwhelmingly agree that the city should seek an alternative to this. The answer was at the time that public trees should basically be treated the same as private tree. The public trees removed could replant one tree where it was removed, but can pay into the recompense just like anyone else. So that fund is available so that we can plant trees elsewhere, but especially be available to purchase forested land. So what's missing is that it denies but this creation of an offset credit just for the Parks Department denies the use of recompense from public trees to be used to purchase forested land to compensate for the reduced number of public trees planted. Before they had to plant the trees, but now they're saying we don't have to plant the trees there, nor do we want to pay into recompense. Instead, we'd like to use an offset. So there is details behind that in the ordinance, and that is available right here. Overall, we do not act.
And Judy, and I think maybe just one of the major issues with this offset, and currently they do not have a way that it can be used to help purchase forested land. So the parks, we lose park trees, but we can't buy more forested land. So that's one major challenge on top of creating a whole separate system. So we have basically two recompense systems, and one of them you can't even buy forested land with. So that's some of our big concerns.
Greg nicely summarized what's missing. If any one of these changes were added to the draft, we can raise the F to a D to a C, so on. But we do have concerns regarding this approach by parks, as well as the permissible expenses from the Tree Trust Fund, which is the key resource that we are using to repair for the trees lost in our city. I know that was super fast, but we got to keep going. So the next issue is about affordable housing. And I do want to keep time for Q&A, so I'm going to go very, very fast. We early on in discussion, all the participants within the working group knew that we needed to address our ability to add affordable housing to the city, and we agree. One of the things that the tree advocates also balance with that need for affordable housing is that people who live in all areas, but especially in affordable housing and in vulnerable areas, need the resources of trees. Some of these changes provide almost no barriers to removing too many trees on property. For example, there's 100% recompense waiver for a single family residential home if the buyer who buys that house has an AMI of 120% AMI, which we kind of took one example, a 4-person household that had 120% AMI, that's $115,000 buying a house for $361,000. That developer would pay 0 recompense if they remove 1 tree or if they move 30 trees. We like the approach of giving offsets to enable when there's a higher number of affordable housing opened up on that property, but we think there might be an imbalance with the benefit, with the discount to the affordable housing developer versus the loss of benefits to the city. So we say what's missing, scale the discounts based on the actual share of affordable housing that is built on that site. This applies to multi-unit housing or to the scale of that single family residential. So there's some adjustments that we would like. We propose a simplified kind of like a percentage model. That didn't make it, but perhaps with a little more discussion, we can improve this particular issue, because we do want to make sure that affordable housing as well as all housing or wherever people live have access to trees. It also, we would also suggest, it's very complex. It's one of the longest sections of the new ordinance, 4 pages of complex monitoring of housing compliance. We'd like to work with a different kind of methodology that doesn't shift that onus to the arborist division. And then we'd also like to see that no project should receive full waiver. There does need to be some kind of representation of the public value lost when you remove trees. And again, the full context is provided at this link. And just to describe what AMI means, here are some, this is where we pulled for the examples, and you can take a look at that as you move along. Lastly, close gaps in tree protection. There's a lot of changes that were that became part of the January draft. We don't know if it was intentional changes or if were typo changes, but there are a number of them that didn't include them all, but some of the ones that popped to mind, and all of these are kind of what makes it a C. For example, we used to have a 10% limit on tree removal on stream buffer. That is no longer there. We used to have appeal rights or tree removal permits for public projects for landscaping permits. That's been removed. We believe that that should be returned. Within the $200,000 allowance for low-income homeowner assistance that I mentioned to you before, pruning was included in the old ordinance, but it's not allowed in the new one. So when we go to a property that needs to have a tree removed because of some risk, oftentimes strategic pruning can save the tree and remove the risk instead of entire tree removal. So we think that's an important change. There's some issues about reporting on a quarterly basis. There's been some inconsistencies on when we receive that data. We would like to make that more consistent. There's some small changes from a legalese perspective, especially around enforcement. Instead of saying shall, the wording is may. We want to do things that make it easier for the arborist division to enforce. Because going back to the very beginning of this process, one of the pain points that we were trying to address was the arborist division telling us enforcement can be difficult due to the TPO being not clear or not strong enough. So wherever we can add clarity, wherever we can make it stronger, we believe it should be done. So there's one thing that is just more informational. One of the new concepts that were added that we are fine with is that tree companies are now required to register with the city. This allows that registration to be pulled if that particular tree company is found to be in violation of the tree protection ordinance over and over again. Lastly, these are the contacts that need to hear your feedback. The Arborist Division Manager, David Zaporanic, sorry, David. His email is here, as well as related to the zoning ordinance. If you have questions, please contact Kieta Holmes, and her information is there. And especially also included in the conversation, Department of City Planning Commissioner Prince, who can be contacted with the email provided here, along with your city council. And again, we will provide these contact points later with language that we suggest that you might use. And then we will go to Q&A. Wow, I just flew through that, so my apologies for everyone, but perhaps you'll be able to digest a little more with the recording of this webinar, as well as the deck that we will provide. Do we have time for any Q&As, or especially any that receive multiple comments by the audience?
First of all, thank you guys so much. So one of the questions that came from Eli is, will Atlanta champion trees and or any heritage trees be offered any protection as part of the TPO revamp?
No, champion trees, the concept of champion trees was never part of the TPO old or new. It's not included right now, but they're the closest that I recall is a concept called heritage trees or historic trees. It's all boggled in my mind. There's no special protection for it.
Great, thank you. Why isn't the planning commissioner publishing the tree quarterly reports?
We understand this started happening almost 2 years ago. We understand that there is a system challenge and they needed to make changes in order to make that happen. But it is a good question. We have been asking for those quarterly reports, and it is one of the most important things for us to monitor whether or not we're going in the right direction in terms of tree loss.
Thank you. Was Trees Atlanta's leadership on a steering committee for the TPO?
It's steering committee. I guess the term is it was called a working group. So Greg and I participated on behalf of Trees Atlanta, and we represent our supporters because we were definitely getting earfuls from enough people during the process. But there were 24 people in that working group representing equity, builders, affordable housing, tree advocates, the city were there. Tree professionals were there. So many people were in that, and I can't believe how much time we put into it. We were just a small portion, but we were there to kind of amplify the points of view of our supporters. So yes, the answer is yes, we were part of it.
Thank you so much for your guys' work on that. I thought the city council passed a resolution to bring the canopy to 50%. Is that not correct?
That is correct. The resolution was passed, I believe, 2023. And it is that goal is part of the January draft. A goal is a goal, but it takes action to meet that goal, right? So it has always been our position that the number one strategy is to protect existing canopy. It is impossible to plant ourselves up. We must protect the existing trees, especially our highest value trees, conserve forested areas. In order for us to have a chance of reversing the decline, we need to do that, and then also aggressively plant.
Thank you. The next question is, it seems like we are getting it up, so the city will need to keep seeing residents to cut down trees to stay in business, but arborists are supposed to keep the trees. How can we prevent this from going through?
I'm sorry, I don't think I understood that question.
Yes, let me try to rephrase that for you.
Go to another one.
Okay. Can you explain the preservation requirements for greenfield sites? It sounds like greenfields are heavily wooded sites that are 5 acres and larger, which you did a little bit.
Yes,
sure?
Yeah, I'll jump in, Judy.
Okay, go for
it. It is the preservation of greenfield sites are sites that have 80% tree canopy and are over 5 acres. And yes, you have to preserve 30% of those sites, whether they're commercial or single family residential. They're supposed, if it's a greenfield site, they are to protect 30% at a minimum. And somebody said another question that was fearful that people might break up 5 acre lots into 2. That is something that would probably need to be addressed. It would be challenging, but it seems like it could be a problem.
When commercial properties are required for 20 trees per acre, is there any direction on tree well sizing?
Greg, your problem?
Yes. Yeah, that was done in the previous ordinance. You have larger areas that you have to have open, and you also have to have more soil volume as well. For a shade tree, you have to have 800 cubic feet of soil, of good soil. And I don't remember the area, but yes, you have enlarged area for the cutout, but also soil volume. And that was already approved in the last ordinance change.
Okay, thank you. Well, we are at the end of our time today. I really want to thank Judy and Greg for all the time they put in throughout this entire process and going through all the ordinance to make sure that we know what is happening right now and what suggestions we can make if we feel like things need to be improved or changed to make some of the grades improve as well. We do have some questions that we were not able to get to today. We will be following up in writing to make sure that your questions are answered. There will also be this recording, which will be posted on our YouTube. And thank you all so much for your interest in this. It's a very important subject, and thank you so much for being here today. Thank you.